Hello, everyone, and welcome to AI Explorer Journeys, our podcast where we navigate the world of artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Sarah, and joining me today is my co host, Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Sarah. Hi, everyone.
It's early Landsendling Arshalok, and the AI hype is absolutely everywhere. You can't escape it. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Are we witnessing a genuine revolution, or are we just living through the early stages of another massive bubble? The strange part is, it feels like it could be both at the same time.
Well, that's the trillion-dollar question, isn't it? And the data is making it even more confusing. A recent analysis pointed out that we've already met 6 out of 7 classic preconditions for a major market bubble. But maybe the most telling one, and the one that feels a bit spooky, is the timing. It's been almost exactly our Shawu years since the dot-com crash.
25 years. That's a whole generation of investors and probably a lot of programmers and VCs who've never really lived through a true brutal multi-year tech winter. They've only ever known a market whereby the dip is the answer to everything.
Exactly. And that's how you lose the muscle memory for fear. People forget what a Mbaffenjabasher drawdown in the Nasdaq actually feels like. We're not talking about a quick dip and recovery. We're talking about devastation. Even the survivors, the future giants, like Microsoft and Amazon, saw their stocks plummet by 65% to 94%. It took Amazon almost 2 decades to recover its 1999peak price. When you lose that collective memory of pain, you start ignoring the warning signs.
But Michael, this time it's different crowd has a point, don't they? They argue that today's AI leaders aren't the empty pet-stern shells of 1999. These are companies with real cash flow and massive profits. That said, I saw a statistic that's deeply unsettling. If you strip away the top biggest companies, the earnings growth for the rest of the SPWUBE is basically zero. Isn't that just a bubble concentrated in a few names?
That's the single most frightening parallel to 1999. You have this incredibly narrow market leadership. A handful of magnificent companies are carrying the entire index, masking the fact that the average business is struggling. It creates this illusion of broad market health, when in reality, it's a very fragile, top-heavy structure. You could argue it's a sign of survival of the fittest in a high-interest rate world, but it also looks a lot like a single point of failure for the whole system.
So we have the structure of a bubble, but do we have the insanity of one? Let's be fair to the optimists for a minute. The numbers coming out of the real economy are staggering. This doesn't feel like pure speculation.
No, it doesn't. And that's what makes this so different from the dot-com era's promises of eyeballs and clicks back. Then, we were buying the promise of a digital future. Today, you can argue we're buying the receipts of a productivity revolution that's already happening.
Right. I mean, you've got companies like Tesco, a supermarket, saving sure 1 miles of driving every single week thanks to AI route optimization.org. LG Display saving eBay million a year on quality control. This isn't pixie dust, it's industrial-grade efficiency.
And the adoption curve is just vertical. It took Google about 7 years to reach Babe million users. OpenAI did it in 3. When you have that many people and businesses actively using a tool, the fundamental value becomes very hard to deny. It's not just a story anymore. It's a utility.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the shoes of a CFO for a moment. If I'm at Sky, the UK media company, and I've just managed to reduce my workforce by 5% because the new AI systems actually work, I'm not really worried about the PE ratio of some tech stock. I'm seeing a direct positive impact on my bottom line. But that's the big question, isn't it? Can these efficiency gains possibly keep up with the mind-boggling amounts of money being spent to create them?
And that is the heart of the bubble argument. The spending is on a scale we've never seen before.
Which brings us to the most controversial and frankly wildest part of this whole story. The eye-watering amount of money being poured into the infrastructure. We have to talk about the trillion-dollar loop.
It's hard to even wrap your head around the numbers. OpenAI is talking about building out data center capacity that will cost north of $1 trillion. They're aiming for 100 gigawatts of power. For perspective, that is more than the entire power consumption of many small countries. And they're doing this while their revenue is still, relatively speaking, in the low tens of billions.
It's a massive spend now, figure out the profit much, much later model. But it's the structure of the spending that's so fascinating. It's this closed loop.
It's the ultimate, trust me, financing model. You have companies like Microsoft and NVIDIA investing billions into AI startups. Those startups then turn around and use that exact money to buy NVIDIA chips and rent Microsoft's cloud services. The investors are also the suppliers. It's brilliant as long as the music keeps playing. It creates this perfectly circular, self-sustaining ecosystem of demand.
It feels a bit like a property developer who wants to build a massive brand new city in the middle of the desert, and the only people living in the city are the construction workers who are being paid by the developer to build more houses for themselves. From the outside, the city looks incredibly busy and full of economic activity, but is there a real self-sustaining economy there? What happens when the developer's money runs out?
That's the perfect analogy. What happens if the real revenue from end users never shows up to replace the investment money from partners? Does the whole loop just seize up and collapse? That's the systemic risk. We are witnessing a trillion-dollar game of musical chairs, where the music is provided by the same people who own the chairs.
But there's one player in this game that wasn't nearly this involved back in Lanson, and that's the government itself. And weirdly, the government's own massive debt might be the very reason this bubble doesn't pop, at least not in the way we'd expect.
This is the most profound difference between now and then. In Lanson, the big risk was in the corporate sector companies were leveraged to the hilt. Today, the big tech companies are drowning in cash. The real leverage, the real risk, is on the government's balance sheet.
The numbers are just staggering. Back in Lansen, U.S. government debt was around 5% of GDP. Today, it's 5%. The Federal Reserve can't just jack up interest rates to 5% like they did to prick the dot-com bubble without risking blowing up the entire national budget.
And that creates what you could call the sovereign floor for the market. In a crisis, the government has very little room to maneuver with fiscal stimulus, which means the central bank will be under immense pressure to keep liquidity flowing to print money. And in a world of high government debt, where does all that new money go? It floods into the few assets that seem safe and are still growing. It goes right back into the Magnificent Seven. It's a perverse incentive structure.
So if the Fed is essentially trapped, if its hands are tied by government debt, does that mean the classic peak signals we're waiting for, like extreme valuations or a frenzy of mega mergers, might just be pushed much further into the future than we expect? Are we basically stuck in a kind of permanent bubble propped up by the government?
It's a real possibility. We could be in a new regime where bad economic news is actually good news for asset prices, because it guarantees more liquidity from central banks. In Landsend, the bubble was a choice the Fed could decide to end. In Lansenling Arschalut, the bubble might be a necessity the government has to maintain to keep the whole system solvent. It's a much stranger and more dangerous game.
Okay, let's try to pull all these threads together. It seems like we're caught in a massive paradox. On one hand, you have valuations. Yes, a PE ratio of Centuwu for the top tech stocks is high, but it's not the terminal insanity of Cisco trading at Lambe times earnings in Lansen. We're in this anxious middle ground.
Right. And there's a fundamental floor that the dot-com era just didn't have. The productivity gains are real and measurable, from supermarkets to electronics manufacturers. This isn't just a dream, but the primary threat is that trillion-dollar loop we talked about, that closed financing system that could unwind spectacularly if user revenue doesn't catch up to the hype.
And underpinning all of it is this new dynamic of sovereign fragility. High government debt might be forcing central banks to become accidental guardians of the bubble, because the alternative, a debt crisis, is even worse. It completely changes the rules of the game.
It really does. The old playbook might not work here.
The most uncomfortable truth of Lanshenling Arshalu is that you can be right about the vision, but completely wrong about the price. We often assume that because a technology is revolutionary, and AI clearly is, that any price paid for it is justified. But history reminds us again and again that buying the future at the wrong valuation is just a slow, painful way to lose money. The real danger here isn't that AI is a fake breakthrough. The danger is that it's a very real breakthrough being used to justify a financial structure that is becoming increasingly detached from reality. We are currently making a collective bet that the productivity AI creates will grow faster than the mountain of debt we are racking up to build it. If that bet fails, the sovereign floor won't be a safety net, it will be the basement. So, the question for every one of us now isn't, is AI real? It's how much am I willing to overpay for the truth? All right, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and thank you, Kevin, for the great discussion. Before we wrap up, let me remind everyone today's discussion reflects personal views only, not investment advice. Please consult professionals before making financial decisions.
That's right. Thanks for tuning in to the AI Explorer podcast. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's all for today. See you next time.